Today's parsha is entitled Terumah, and it addresses God's instructions to Moses to take up a collection in order to build the tabernacle. And we begin in chapter 25, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring to me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves you." And then skipping down to verse 8, "And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them. Exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all of its furnishings, so shall you make it." And the parsha continues on, giving very specific instructions about the tabernacle and all the furnishings of it. But I want to focus in a little bit more on verse 8 and 9. I've paralleled the Hebrew there, and I want to highlight a phrase there. It's veshachanti, which means loosely, I may dwell. God talking about I may dwell. And in verse 9, the tabernacle, highlighted there, hamishkan. If we take those two words and we put them next to each other, veshachanti, I may dwell, and hamishkan, the tabernacle, we see that they have a common Hebrew root. The letters, for those of you who aren't too familiar with the Hebrew, it's a shin, chaf, nun. And we read from right to left, and that last letter there on the left side is a nun, as well as that letter. And again, for those of you who aren't too familiar, when the nun is at the end of a word, it takes a different form and drops down. But I assure you, it is the same letter. So that root, being the shin, chaf, nun, is also the root for a term that some of you may be familiar with, the Shekhinah. Interestingly, this actual form of that is not actually found in the Scriptures. It is something that is more rabbinical commentary and things like the Pirkei Avot, the Zohar. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes a bit more of a heterodox commentary on it, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. The point is, the root of it, the Shin Chaf Nun, is addressing God's dwelling, whether it's his dwelling with the people or within the tabernacle. And some of you may already be familiar with the fact that the tabernacle is essentially a precursor or foreshadowing of the more permanent temple that was in Jerusalem. Just take a quick look at that. The first temple, otherwise known as Solomon's temple, is addressed in some of those scriptures there. There's plenty of them, but those are a few examples of that. That temple was destroyed, and the second temple was constructed, found in places like the book of Ezra. And that was destroyed, many of you may know, around 70 AD, shortly after Messiah resurrected. And we look forward to a third temple eventually being built, again addressed in some of these scriptures in Daniel and in Matthew. But I want to address something that I refer to as the disciples' temple, which is referred to in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 through 17. And we read, "Do you not know that you are a temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If any man destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy, and that is what you are." Now, if you've come to faith, if you've truly repented and you're a believer here today, you are a temple of God. You are to be holy. I think a lot of times we overlook that and we don't understand the full significance of that. So I've broken that down into two areas. One is the physical temple of our bodies, and the other is the psychological temple. As for the physical temple, I want to take a few things that we should consider when we take care of our body. Some things such as our eating habits. I'll get back to that in just a moment. Drinking. We are taught not to be drunkards. Smoking. Even sexual immorality, fornication, adultery, homosexuality, etc. But as I said, I want to touch on the topic of eating. Now, I address this just as much to myself as anybody else. I have challenges with my diet and my eating habits, and so this isn't to point anybody out. But one person who is a good example of healthy lifestyle is our own Rabbi Doug. There are times that I've called him up during the week on a Tuesday or so, and he's politely asked, "May I call you back? I need to go to the gym." Other times I've called, he says, "May I call you back? I've got to have dinner." And more often than not, it's a healthy dinner. He understands that it's not just for a healthy lifestyle, but it's a witness of his testimony of the Lord. Self-discipline, self-control. It is something of his physical body that he takes care of. Another example of that is, some of you may know, Dr. Michael Brown. For those of you who don't know who he is, he's a prominent Messianic Jewish leader. He's spoken here at least once. He's also been a visiting professor at Talbot. And he also struggled with his weight for a while. Here's a picture of him. I don't think you can see it there, but he weighs 270 pounds in that picture. He dropped quite a bit of weight at almost 100 pounds, where you see him there at 177 pounds. He even wrote a book entitled Breaking the Stronghold of Food, which is this book here, and I want to read just a quick excerpt from it. I do not want to lay a guilt trip on anyone, and if you are overweight or aware that your diet is unhealthy, you probably feel bad enough already. So the last thing I want to do is make you feel even worse. Instead, I want to talk with you heart to heart, encouraging you to consider whether there might be a serious spiritual dimension to unhealthy eating. This could be the incentive you need to make a positive change. Let's think about drunkenness for a moment. As followers of Yeshua, we know that getting drunk is sinful in God's sight. It impairs us in many ways, and it is life-destroying in many ways. And so long-term alcoholism can be deadly, not only because of the dangers of drunk driving or the possibilities of unwise behavior while drunk, but also because of cirrhosis of the liver and other diseases. If we abuse our bodies with alcohol, there will be consequences. How about cigarette smoking? I imagine most believers feel this is sinful as well. The question is, why? Is it dangerous to smoke while driving? Not in a major way. Does smoking cigarettes impair our judgment and twist our behavior the way drunkenness does? Certainly not. Then why do we believe it is wrong? Aside from being a wasteful addiction, the obvious answer is that it is destructive to our bodies, leading to lung cancer and other deadly conditions. What about unhealthy eating, which can mean eating in excess, gluttony, or eating the wrong foods? Often it is a combination of both. Is that sinful in God's sight? There's a lot of good insights in here, and because of that, I've just started reading it, almost done with it. I have personally purchased 3 extra copies. And if anybody would like one of these, I'm giving them away free of charge. If you're serious about making some drastic changes in your life, see me after services. And I also addressed, as I said, something of our psychological temple. Just a few things. Depression. At about 10 years old, my own mother was clinically diagnosed with manic/bipolar depression. And as a kid growing up, I kind of feel as though you're the only one to experience this kind of situation. It was quite chaotic and challenging in our household until I attended the University of Judaism, which some of you may know I attended. Now, at the expense of sounding politically incorrect and possibly offensive, my Jewish classmates and their relatives and professors showed me that my experiences were quite mild in comparison. It was almost like walking case studies in psychology that ran the gauntlet of different conditions. In fact, sometimes I had to go to their homes for the high holidays. They weren't believers. And the family dynamics and the interactions were very neurotic, to say the least. But ironically, I felt quite comfortable considering my past home life. But in all seriousness, depression is something that's quite debilitating for a number of people, whether it's therapy or medication, and that's something of our psychological temple. Pride. Some of you who are wealthy or have a number of degrees or life experiences, if you're so full of yourself, where is the room for the Ruach to reside? Pornography. Unfortunately, this is a plague in our society, and it's also within the body. People struggle with this within the body who are self-proclaimed believers. But I want to focus a little bit on music. Some of you may know the legend of Faust from the 16th century. It's a German legend of a person who literally signs a contract with the devil to sell his soul in order to acquire certain knowledge and wisdom. And there's different variations of it, but it's termed the Faustian legend. And this is the basis for what would later be, which would later be the legend of Robert Johnson of the 1930s. He was a famous blues guitarist who apparently could not play blues, but he eventually went to what was known as the Crossroads, a place in Mississippi where he would meet the devil and sell his soul, knowing that after he died, he'd basically be damned, but that while he lived, he would gain notoriety. And so the legend goes. In 1975, a group by the name of Black Sabbath entitled an album, "We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll." These are just a few examples of what power music has. There is an undeniable spiritual element to music. It doesn't have to be heavy metal. It doesn't have to be blues. It could be regular pop music. Music in and of itself is a very powerful tool that plays on our psychology. There's a mathematical formula to composing songs, half beats, quarter beats. And so we should be aware and guard ourselves to the types of music that we consume and expose ourselves to. And so not to focus on the negativity, I want to draw your attention to some positive things that you should be listening to or consuming in way of music. Our very own Chuck Ott. We are extremely, extremely blessed to have Chuck as part of our congregation. He is a servant of the Lord who dedicates every Shabbat to getting here and preparing and bringing us time of worship to just allow our minds to consume and invite the Ruach in. Whether it's one of his own songs or some of the songs that he's played from others, this is the type of thing that we should be allowing into our minds, into our psychology. Some other examples, this gentleman by the name of Joshua Aaron, he's a Messianic musician, and Sarah Lieberman, she's another Messianic artist. My point is that if music is not glorifying the Lord and we're allowing it to seep into our minds, it is affecting our psychological temple. It has a powerful effect on who we are. And so I'll leave you with the verses from 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Do you not know that you are a temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If any man destroys the temple of God, God will destroy him, for the temple of God is holy, and that is what you are, both your physical and psychological temple. God be with you. Shabbat shalom.